In 1996, Swans released their album Soundtracks for the Blind, and my friend Matt and I are going to talk about it on this episode of Records with Ray. Soundtracks for the Blind. Well, first of all, it never really was a soundtrack to anything, was it?
I don't think so.
Was it supposed to be, or was that the original idea, or were they just like messing around and just decided, hey, let's call this album Soundtracks for the Blind? Why'd they call it that?
You know, I don't think it had anything to do with it actually being a soundtrack. I think it was just another one of. Well, at the time, Michael Gira and Jarboe were still together as a team, as a band, and to me, it was. Sort of may sound a little bitter towards the two of them, but I think it was really the last Swans album. I think it was really the end of it for them, because the things that came afterwards, Angels of Light, Gira bringing back Swans as a band.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't the two of them anymore.
No.
Jarboe did some great stuff by herself. Michael did some great stuff by himself, but as a band, they weren't the same together. They weren't. They were bringing in other collaborations, and I don't think they were really Swans anymore.
Was like even up until like they did soundtracks. What was Swans a band, or was it Michael Gira and like a bunch of people? You know what I'm saying?
No, I think there were points where they were a band as a band. He certainly had favorites over the years of people that he worked with, including Jarboe, and they were I think as a unit a band that really played as a cohesive band. Like I said, I mean when years later when he worked on the Angels of Light project, it was just something a little different about it. It still was him, but it wasn't the same idea. And then after that, Swans existed again as Swans, but I don't think it was really that same unit that made up everything up to the soundtracks.
The thing, well, okay, from my observations, the Angels of Light was definitely a more depressing music.
Really, it was
real
more
sad.
It was more folk oriented too, a little bit.
Yeah.
Not to, I mean, that's with big quotes around it, but it was more of a. Seemed to me, at least the first one, New Mother, was more about kind of Americana folk album. Not that it was really strumming guitar folk music, but it had elements of what you would consider to be more of a folk album.
Yeah, and then when the Swans got back together,
sure,
a lot of that music was I was going to say experimental, but that's kind of like a misnomer when it comes to the Swans.
Yeah,
but I remember,
alternative music.
But a lot of the songs were more about like, let's take this riff or this idea and build it and build it and build it.
Right,
but
right.
I remember,
until every string on the guitar is broken and drumsticks have flown from the stage, and
I'll never forget my introduction into Swans. I think it might have been you, and I'm a big fan of the album Godflesh. Godflesh's Street Cleaner.
Sure.
And I remember, I think it was you that was like, oh, that sounds it's just like the Swans, I think it was like Body to Body or
right, some of that stuff,
or Filth or something like that, like the early Swans. And I'm listening to them like, oh my God, I don't know if Godflesh intentionally stole from the Swans, but my introduction to Swans was those first couple albums because it reminded me of Godflesh.
Yeah,
and it was this real crashing, loud,
repetitive. Yeah, things like Holy Money and a Screw.
It was like almost like a little
raping a slave, and like, I mean,
it was
dark as dark could be. I mean, that was, and repetitive and crashing and at the time when some of that stuff came out, I mean, there was noise music, whatever it was, or no wave or whatever these scenes were, but it was still separate from a lot of that. I mean, they had elements that were. Nobody could touch that stuff. I mean, it was on another level of just that sort of dark and primal, and definitely on its doing its own thing.
And I remember you introduced me to soundtracks, and
I actually, I mean, sometimes the people that I've introduced that album to, you sort of have to offer a warning with it, because it's
What would be that warning?
It's an investment to get it. I think it should be you should sit down and listen to it as a whole.
Yeah.
If not as two pieces, but really as a whole, because I think that's where it works best. It everything on that, to me, is just so perfectly sequenced. You go from really some of the tracks where it's that earliest sound of Swans to something like Volcano with these crazy looped bits, and Jarbo's lyrics on that, and just found sound type stuff. I mean, a lot of like loops and percussive elements and things like that, little spoken word bits. Even versions of songs that they recorded on earlier albums are there. So it's to me, it's an emotional investment of an album.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, it might be overselling it, but it's certainly an album that should not be taken lightly, because I think it was intended to be that sort of cohesive piece. And I can't tell you how many times I've listened to it in full, because I really feel like...
And it's a double album.
Yeah.
And you'll listen to the whole thing all the way through.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. And again, I think it's really sequenced to enjoy it that way.
Yeah.
And it's not the type of thing where, in this age of iPod shuffling and things, like, I can't imagine some of the bits of it coming up just at random in shuffle, because I think they really should fall together with where they are on that album. And again, even I think the artwork itself was genius. It was a gold album and a silver album, and the cover was really basic typography, and I still have the CD version of it that I first bought, and the craft paper, brownish colored paper that it's printed on, all of that. Everything about it was perfect. I've said it in the past that I really think it's probably at this point my favorite album of all time. Spanning every bit of music that I like, because it's really everything that I like about music, all in one place. There's emotion and sort of rawness to it, and there's talent, and there's lyrics and poetry, and some studio kind of playing around with the found sounds and loops and things like that. I think a lot of it really is, it all comes together with an album like that. And it was written, to me, it wasn't necessarily written as an album, but it was sequenced and put together as an album. Because again, a lot of it comes from different sources.
Because there's like live footage on it, right?
Yeah, there's some live stuff in there, and again, some of the songs were from other eras of Swans, so it's pulling together all this stuff, but it really, to me, was like the perfect, again, the sort of close of an era for them. It was like sort of a culmination of everything that they were perfect at doing. At that point.
Well, I remember you introduced me to soundtracks, and again, the stuff that I heard from Swans before was all the earlier stuff.
Right. And there's that. It's there.
And I remember, like, I don't want to say it was a hard album to take, because I loved it immediately, but it was definitely it wasn't one type of music.
Right.
Like, each song, it definitely has its own vibe, its own feeling. You have some of the crashing, like, earlier stuff, but then there's like this slow, sad, depressing kind of songs. You have these like atmospheric kind of songs. I don't want to me it's kind of like almost like their Beatles' White Album in a way. The fact that you have this album that has all these different types of music,
and it's another one of those,
and it all fits.
And like most albums that I've listened to so many times, I literally will hear the next song. You expect that next song in the sequence because you're so used to hearing it in that order.
Yeah.
And I still feel that way about a lot of those songs. You know what's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And your brain is expecting that. So that's also partly why I really can't listen to it outside of like listening to it as an album.
I'll never forget the first time I listened to soundtracks all the way through. I was on a flight from JFK, New York, to Pittsburgh. And it was on one of those prop planes.
Oh, jeez.
And it was like during the winter, and it was like bad weather.
Right.
And it was crazy. It was like one of the most turbulent kind of trips I've ever been on in a plane. And Soundtracks for the Blind was the soundtrack to that scary flight. So
right.
Soundtracks will always be in my heart for
right.
better or for worse.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's very good.
Cool. It's good. It's very good. Will you shut up, Danielle? We're trying to film a video here. Will you tell your girlfriend to be quiet? I don't even get a chuckle out of that.
No, she showed a tongue.
Don't even get a laugh. No, like ha ha ha.